Hey everybody, today I'm taking a look at Amsterdam, which is a 1 to 4 player board game designed by Stefan Feld. This one takes around 90 minutes to play. Now Amsterdam is a re-implementation of an older Feld game called Macao, which has been out of print for a very long time. Before I get started on my review of Amsterdam, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer when it comes to acquiring board games here in England. And if you use my link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. Okay, so I've just finished a 3-player game of Amsterdam here, and the board is going to look something like this. Now at the top of the board you have this kind of dock area where you have your own little boat, and you're going to be sailing that boat around trying to deliver specific commodities to specific locations. So you can see here that this particular block of buildings here wants these barrels, and if you are the first person to do it, then you get 4 points, and each person after that, or you can do it again yourself, is going to get diminishing returns. Now you also have these warehouses which accept any goods, but there's a lot smaller capacity to store those, where only one warehouse can store one good. And randomly at the start of the game there's going to be all these different kind of dock workers allocated on these different docks, and the idea is you want to be delivering these colours to their matching coloured peers. So if I deliver this brown worker to this spot by again moving my boat around, then I will be able to move that to this area here. And again, the sooner you do it, the more points you are going to get. The bottom half of the board is where the kind of map of Amsterdam is, and you can see at the start of the game all of these commodities are going to be randomly distributed on each of these little islands, I suppose, and you're going to have to spend a certain type of resource in order to acquire those tiles onto your personal player board, with aim of delivering them to those docks later. Now you can also see that throughout that map of Amsterdam you have this track which is an initiative turn order, and if you really push further you can end up acquiring points as you go. And in the bottom left hand corner of the board here you have the black market, where when you end up acquiring these tiles you can swap them with another one if you want to, or you can put one onto an empty spot and end up taking 2 coins. The game is also going to include this communal cardboard here, which just stores these decks and also tracks the round you're on. It's also going to store these bonus tiles which you can use throughout the game. There's going to be a bunch of these resource cubes. Now there is a separate board that comes with the game which is used to store these cubes, but personally I think it becomes a bit too much of a table hog with that, so I just use these standard component holders there. And each person is going to have their personal player board, which looks like this. Now before the game starts you won't actually have the cards here, but again this is the end of a 3-player game. But this board is generally just going to store these shields of yours to show which islands you control. It's also going to show what's on your barge, including these people here, and it's going to store your money and these windmill tokens, which are simply used to track which cards you've used. The game is also going to come with these resource wheels, which is kind of the resource management system in the game. It's going to come with a bunch of dice here matching the resources, and depending on the player count you're going to put out a number of these bonus tiles matching certain areas within Amsterdam, which is going to be viable for competition when it comes to area control at the end of the game. The game plays out over 12 rounds or 10 rounds if you want to play a shorter game, and of course the player with the most victory points at the end of the game will be the winner. So the first thing you're going to do each round is to reveal a certain number of these cards. Now there are 3 different decks. You've got these map cards, you've got these character cards, and you have these building cards too. And the arrangement is going to vary depending on the player count. So let's just say in this 3-player game we revealed 2 character cards, 1 building card, and 2 map cards. Now in turn order you are going to draft these cards and add them to your player board here. Now, when you draft these cards, you have to consider not only what you need to spend on them, which is going to be these resources here. So this particular card here wants 2 brown cubes and a pink cube. But you're also going to have a look at the ability on what it offers you. So you can see here they do a bunch of different things, and I must admit the symbology isn't the best. But this one says like when you play a building card, you can do it for 1 resource cheaper by the looks of it. Or this one here, for each different type of map card you get a victory point. And these all do different things at different times. So you can see that some of them are always going to be active, like this one here, which is an infinite symbol. And this one here is only going to be relevant during the main action phase. And there's a ton of different cards here, as you can imagine, like this, where if you use this particular type of map card, you can get a coin, or you can discard a pink cube to get a coin, or discard a grey cube and get a coin and a point, and so on. Now, when that draft happens, you are forced to take a card and add it to one of these 5 slots below your personal player board. Now, if you have no room to place one of these cards, then you are forced to take one of these penalty tokens, which will end up acquiring and accumulating negative points the more you collect. And that can really ramp up, so you want to be making sure that you get these cards played before you end up drafting a new one. And once you've completed the card draft, you're going to go into the resource distribution phase, which is when you are going to roll these 6 dice and select 2 of them. Now, the color, of course, is important because that's going to relate to the different resources you need. You might want those resources in order to acquire certain commodity tiles here. So, if I really wanted these 2 cups here, I might want 3 black resources. But obviously, I'm also thinking about which cards I want to build because I want to get them played and not end up acquiring those negative tokens there. But let's just say I ended up choosing this brown 1 and the black 5. So I'm going to choose those 2 resources, or select them from the supply there, and add them onto my resource wheel. Now, depending on the pip value that I've just chosen, it is going to go on that location. So you can see I chose the brown 1, which is 1 resource on the 1 spot, and the black 5, which is these big 5 cubes there, which will go on the 5 spots. Now, it's important to say that everybody can choose the same ones if you want to. There's no kind of turn order distribution there. You can take what you want. And once you've taken your resources, you are going to rotate the wheel anti-clockwise 1 space like so. And then anything relating to this arrow spot is going to come out and be used, or be available to be used this round. Now, if you ever rotate the wheel and you cannot actually spit out any resources, then you're going to be forced to take another penalty token. So you can see here that if you end up drafting the higher valued resources, you're going to have to wait a long time until they come back round available to be actually used. So let's take a look at all the different actions you can do during the main action phase. So the first of which is to build one of your stored cards here. So these are not available to be used yet. You just have the option to buy them. And of course, you'd cash in the resources and put that card in your tableau ready to be used. The second action is to actually use one of these cards. Now, a lot of the time they won't need resources or anything, but sometimes they will. So you'd cash in those resources and then tap those cards to show that you've already used it this turn. Now, the next option you can do is to acquire one of these commodities, of course, by spending the resources on here. So let's just say I spent 3 of these kind of purple resources. I'll take that like so. I'd put one of my player crests onto that matching spot, because at the end of the game, this is important because each connecting shield of your own is going to be worth 3 points each, at least in your biggest group. So that's a good viable way of scoring points there. And when you acquire these resources, you're going to add them onto this little storage area of your personal player board. Another thing you can do is to push along the initiative track. So for one resource of any type, you can move once like so, but for every other space, you have to cash in any 2 resources. So, for example, if I wanted to move it to here, it'll be 1 resource and then 2 resources. If I wanted to move again, it'll be another 2 resources. Once per turn, you have the option to use the bonus tiles here. So in this example, you can spend 1 coin in order to get a victory point and to move 2 along the initiative track. And these vary quite a bit. So this one here says you can spend 5 coins in order to get 11 points and a resource cube. And the other option is to move your boat around the dock area. So for each kind of speed bump you run into, you're going to have to spend an additional resource. So let's just say I wanted to move my yellow boat here from this area to this yellow dock. I'd have to spend 1 resource of any type and then another resource of any type. Now, of course, the idea is that I'm trying to deliver these certain goods to these certain locations in order to get those points. But also it's important to land on these kind of crane areas like so, because if you end up on one of these spots, you can end up moving all of the commodities you've collected from your storage area onto your actual barge, meaning that it's now eligible to be scored. Also, if you ever go to a dock where there's a dock worker there, you could end up acquiring them, picking them up and putting them on your barge. And if you do that, you get a coin with the idea of trying to deliver them to their certain docks and get these victory points from here, which we discussed earlier. Now, something that's also important to say is that the earlier you make these deliveries, the more points you are going to get. So you can see here in the first 7 rounds, you're going to get bonus points for making deliveries on either those commodities or those dock workers. Like if you get one done in the first or second round, you get a massive bonus 7 or 6 points. Or, when you get the 6th or 7th round, you get 2 or 1 point respectively. And that is essentially how the game plays out over 12 rounds. At the end of the game, you're going to add up all the points you've gained during the game, add them with your endgame scoring in relation to your biggest connecting regions of your player pieces here, 3 points for each one of those. You're also going to have a look at the majorities of these different areas here, which were set up during the setup of the game. Like, for example, on the player, depending on the player count, if you've got the majority in those areas in a 2-player game, you get 5 points. But in a 4-player game, you get first, second, and third place. There's also the potential to acquire these end game scoring points that look like this. Like in this example, if you end up getting your boat back to the original starting place on the dock area, then you'll get a bonus 8 points. Okay, so let's get into the review of Amsterdam. And I want to start with probably my favourite mechanism of the whole game, which is the resource wheel here. I think this mechanism is fascinating and I love the way it works. When you're choosing the resources you want, you have the option either to take the small amounts but have them available to you immediately, or you can take the bigger chunks of resources, those 5s or 6s, but you have to wait 5 or 6 turns in order to use them at your disposal. So I really like the way that works, and especially added with the fact that if you don't have anything or one of these empty spots when it comes to rotating, then you are going to take one of these punishment tokens, which is not good. So sometimes you'll be forced to take the 1 or 2s, even if you've not really got a massive plan for them, just so you don't have to suffer those negative tokens, because these do ramp up quite significantly and can hurt you badly if you end up acquiring too many. Also, that added pressure of the card capacity here, you want to be making sure that you're at least shifting some of these cards out of here, not only because you want the abilities, but because, again, you can end up acquiring these negative points. So it's good that it does put you under some pressure here, but not too much. You can kind of zig and zag at times and end up taking the easy options here, even if you don't have the massive desire to utilize the power of that card, but because they're going to be relatively cheap to buy. Like, it's not going to be difficult for me to acquire 2 brown cubes, but the ability isn't necessarily the best, whereas the mixed ones like this, like where you're having a bunch of different cubes, meaning that you've at least taken a few turns in order to put them all on the same action space, then their abilities are going to be much better. Like in this example, whenever I take a 1 value die as a resource, then I'm going to get a bonus 2 coins. And money in this game is extremely valuable, something I definitely learnt the hard way. You always want to be making sure that you have money in your pockets in order to utilize these tiles here, because these can swing the game massively if somebody keeps on getting them and you do not. And a very important thing I did not mention is that when you end up taking all your resources from the wheel, and of course you'd have much more than this in the actual game, if you don't spend them all, then you can only actually carry 1 over to the next round. So you can have a ton of resources there, but if you don't have a plan for them, then they're probably not going to be used too effectively, and you could have been wasting them all. So you do want to be aligning them with the card you're building. Yes, you can use them just to kind of move your boat around the dockyard, or you can use them in order to move along the initiative track, which is very important. This is definitely something you want to be competing in, because you'll get first dibs on the drafting, you get first dibs on getting the buildings that you want, because the map is quite tight, and sooner or later you will be stepping on each other's toes, and you might both want the same particular block of buildings there to add to your connection or to start competing for those majorities. I think the pick up and deliver part of the game is simple, but it's done very well. I like the way that you can plan your moves here, and you can plan effective routes by thinking, I'm going to move my boat here. I'm going to load up on the commodities I've selected. That's right next to the place that I want to deliver it to. Let's get in there before the other players do, so I can get those big chunk of points there. And at the same time, I might be en route to something else, and then be able to pick up a certain dock worker or drop one off, and so on. So you are rushing to get these done. And again, you can actually think ahead and think, I'm going to deliver these here, I'm going to pick up this commodity then I'm going to drive to here, drop it off here, and so on. So I do like the way this all comes together. I think it was a very cool touch, and Feld has been known to do this before, where you are incentivized to get out of the gate strong and hot, because if you get these deliveries done early, you're going to get a massive bonus, 7, 6 or 5 points, which is definitely quite significant. But if you do that, you're probably going to be falling behind on getting these cards down and establishing your engine early. And something I've learnt the hard way is that you do want to have an eye on these cards and getting them built. and not neglect them, because this is a 12-round game, and the earlier you get these cards built, especially the stronger ones, it means you have more rounds to exploit them, and that can really put you in a strong position if you do end up building those good cards. So it is a kind of a cool two-pronged approach there, where, you know, do you want to neglect this and go for those bonus points, or do you want to play the long game, get a cool engine down, and then try to win that way? Due to the resource distribution, the game does have quite a strange flow to it, because sometimes you'll be taking pretty pathetic turns and maybe only having 1 or 2 cubes and you're not being able to do much with it. And then because you end up stockpiling a bunch on certain action spots, you can have this whole kind of section here full of resources, and you have some kind of mega turn where you can get so much done. And because you are kind of playing, you know, not level with the other players, it might mean that one turn you have nothing to do and your opponent has loads, and then the next turn it's vice versa. So just something to bear in mind there, that sometimes you might have to sit back and let your opponents really mull over their turns when yours takes, you know, a fraction of a second. There is a good degree of player interaction here. You are, of course, going to be competing in that open draft there, making this initiative order very important. I like the idea that, again, you are stepping on each other's toes in order to acquire the commodities that you want, because, you know, the flow of the game is going to mean that if you all go for the same thing, then the deliveries are going to be worth fewer and fewer points. So you might want to go for something else, but of course, everybody is going to want the same thing, which again leads back to that initiative track. Now, I must admit, I felt like this majority part of the game was a little bit tacked on. I don't dislike it, but I don't think it was entirely necessary either. But generally, yeah, it's quite a competitive game, and you want to be beating other players to the punch and doing most things in this one. Now, I think the time investment of the game is also pretty good. You are looking at 90 minutes to play this one in a 3 or 4 player game, but I did find myself engaged through the whole thing, because you do have to do so much forward planning in this one. It's not a game where you can just kind of wing it and hope it works out, because you are going to be really bitten. You'll hit hard if you do that, because you're going to fall behind on getting these cards built, and you're not going to be using or maneuvering around the dockyard efficiently. I think my sweet spot in terms of the player count here is 3 players, which is the general case when it comes to Stefan Feld games for me. My second option would probably be 2 players and then the 4 players. And the reason I say that is because of what I mentioned earlier, where you can end up having quite lengthy turns. And when it's a 4-player game, you might have to sit through a couple of lengthy turns before it's your go. So yeah, bear that in mind. But generally, I think it scales well. There is a solo mode, which I haven't played. You know, I'm not a solo gamer, so again, I cannot testify to how good the solo mode is. I'm generally happy with the production for this game. The board is a little bit garish for me, but I don't dislike it. All the components themselves are high quality, like your player pieces are nice and robust. Standard wooden Euro components, such as your meeples and your tokens. The card quality is also decent. You know, these are linen finished cards, which is what you'd probably expect when you are paying these prices. But I want to again kind of put some criticism on the symbology of the game, and this applied to some of the other games in the Stefan Feld collection. The symbology isn't always the most intuitive, and I would probably recommend getting your language dependent cards so you can know what they do just at a glance and not refer back to the rulebook. The game is also a bit of a table hog. Now, I mentioned earlier that this isn't actually well, the setup I have here doesn't actually involve all the pieces, so there is actually another board which stores all the cubes, but that would be so huge that I don't think I'd even fit it on this rather large table. So bear that in mind, and you are building a big tableau of cards out as well, so you are going to need a big table to play this one. But yeah, everything else is good. The resource wheels are good, they work as they should, and yeah, generally I'm happy with the production. Okay, so let's share some final thoughts on Amsterdam. So there's a lot I like about this game. I want to go straight to the resource mechanism here. I think this is absolutely brilliant. And when I read it in the rulebook, I thought that's simple, but very cool. And it turned out in practice, I liked it as much as I thought I would. Very interesting mechanism there. There is the potential to build some very cool engines, especially if you focus on getting them built early. You can build some very cool things, and some of these cards synergize with each other in very interesting ways. So yeah, another facet of the game that's, you know, leaves you a lot to discover. Now, I will say I think there's a pretty steep learning curve with this game. I think in your first game or two, you're going to make a lot of silly mistakes. But for me, the idea that I want to come back and rectify those mistakes and do better is a sign, and a sign of a quality design there. So that for me has left me intrigued. I want to do better than I've done before. And I think I can do that now. I've got those kind of kinks out of my system. But I think it's going to be a somewhat polarizing design at times, because I know pick up and deliver isn't everybody's cup of tea. I personally generally like pick up and deliver games. I think this is one of my favourite ones. I think the pick up and deliver here is done very well, and it's not the main feature of the game. It's a significant part, but it's not the dominating part, or at least not the standout dominating part, which I think is a good balance amongst the other things here. So yeah, there's good competition. I generally love the way that Feld utilises initiative and makes it such a pivotal part of the game, and that certainly shines through here as well. And yeah, it's just a very cool game. Definitely unique in the way it feels. And, you know, Feld has made lots of games now, and the idea that I keep playing them and I keep feeling, satisfied and interested by playing them more and more, it just goes to show that he is one of my favourite designers, and I think he's just an absolute, genius of a man. So yeah, if you like Feld games, I'm pretty sure you'll like this one. If you don't like pick up and deliver, maybe steer away from it. But generally, I'm very happy with the design, and definitely intrigued to play it more. And it's up there for me. So that is Amsterdam. It's going to get a accommodation from me, and I probably expected that anyway because I am such a Feld fanboy. So there we go. That is Amsterdam.